afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to European Union press conference with Minister Dieschbourg and Commissioner Arias-Cañete. I will immediately pass the floor to Minister Dieschbourg, please.
Thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us. This is an important week which is beginning. We have the opportunities to write history, to be the leaders that put the world on a course to avoid dangerous climate change. This week, we have to focus on our mission. We have to focus why we are here. So if you ask any of the ministers why they do this job or why they are here, I hope that they will see exactly what I will tell you. Because it's personal and because we have to deliver. We all have families, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, children, grandchildren, some of us. These are the people behind the words, the statistic, the numbers we have been focusing on so hard for the last years. It is not about numbers. It is about lives. It is about our destiny, and it is about people and the planet. We need to act urgently and to put the world on a path to a climate neutral, a climate resilient and stable development. Only a solid and robust agreement involving all parties will do this. A few words now on the process. We have a difficult week ahead of us with a text of 43 pages, the agreement and the decisions, and with all the major issues still unsolved. But we are confident we can rise to the challenge if all parties show openness and willingness to compromise. And I believe that ministers are fully engaged. In the EU ministerial coordination this morning, all member states confirmed their commitment to work towards an ambitious agreement protecting all countries from impacts of climate change. The EU is very active in this process proposed by the French presidency. Laurent Fabius set up the Paris Committee where all ministers can meet. Additionally, there are specific subgroups dealing with more delicate issues such as differentiation, ambition, finance and pre-2020 action. Groups on other topics will follow. The new agreement is within our reach. We need a strong political will to adopt a binding global agreement applicable to all parties by the end of this week. And we have seen firsthand how cities, companies, businesses and organizations are engaged in the fight against climate change. We've seen this through the actions of the Lima Paris Action Agenda. We've seen this on this Action Day on Saturday. This gave us an opportunity to see the concrete examples on the ground. And it is clear for me that the non-state actors and the regions have a vital role to play in meeting our staying below the 2 degrees target. On our morning session with the ministers, we also showed openness to the 1.5 degree target. This is very important for the most vulnerable. So let me be clear. The transition to a sustainable, climate-resilient economies will be a huge challenge. And at the same time, it offers us an opportunity to revitalize our economies and build global stability and well-being. In this context, the EU defends human rights and gender equality, as well as a just transition, as principles that should guide the ambitious implementation of the agreement. A strong climate agreement will also help achieve food security, one of the goals in the 2030 Agenda for Development. We can also look forward to multiple other benefits, including improvement of health, access to sustainable energy, safer food and water supply, and economic growth. And it's important to stress what the EU experience has shown. We do not have to sacrifice economic growth when we take action to protect climate. We are on track to meet our 2020 targets for emissions reduction, renewables, and energy efficiency. And we have set ourselves an even more ambitious target to reduce emissions by at least 40% by 2030. The whole world stands to benefit from the shifts towards a global, climate-neutral and climate-resilient economy and society. So let us seize these opportunities now, work together for a solid agreement. Let us show courage and commitment. The world is waiting for us to deliver. And now, Commissioner, you have the floor.
Thanks, Carole. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. And make no mistake about it, this week is critical for our climate and for each one of us. The next 5 days will determine how the world will look like for decades to come. So it's the time to get down to very serious business of turning the draft we are actually working into a solid and ambitious deal. Today, I want to focus on mitigation ambition. There are 3 essential elements required for ensuring that the Paris Agreement put us on track to keep global warming below 2 degrees. And these are, first, a long-term goal, second, a 5-yearly review mechanism, and third, transparency and accountability rules. Let me be very clear. This is not a wish list of the European Union. These are must-have. Let me tell you why. Firstly, a clear and operational long-term goal in line with science. This is not just about a roadmap giving us a direction of travel. This is about a clear signal to the world, to industry and the investors, that we are serious about transforming to a global low-carbon economy, to our citizens and the global community, that climate science will guide us and that we will base our political decisions on science. Secondly, the 5-year review mechanism is very simple. The INDCs do not get us to our below 2 degrees objective. They are a very good starting point. We have made a long way since Kyoto. The Kyoto Protocol, there were 38 countries with binding commitments who cover less than 13% of the world global emissions, and now we have a substantial number of countries, more than 178, but they cover 96.5% of world global emissions. But they are not enough. We need to do much more. And this is why countries should come together regularly every 5 years to consider where we are in respect of our targets and strengthen ambition over time, because this will enable us to keep up with the latest science and technological progress. And last but not least, we need rules on transparency and accountability, because without clear rules, we cannot monitor progress. We need all countries to have confidence that partners will deliver what they promise, and we need to make sure that numbers can be added up and compared. And this is why we need a common single system for all with limited flexibilities for the least developed countries. These 3 elements are reasonable asks, and many other parties feel the same way. In the Ambition Group, where Carole and I participated in yesterday and today in bilaterals, there was a high degree of consensus on this point, and this is encouraging. We still have to work on the detail, but I am very glad that the discussions center around the key asks of the European Union. However, I have heard a few countries, and you know who they are, saying that an ambitious deal in Paris will limit their economic growth or make them poorer. These countries seem to be more comfortable with a low level of ambition in the agreement. Let me tell you why we think this negotiation position is not right. It is not ambitious climate action that limits economic growth. On the contrary, ambitious climate action drives economic growth. And the European Union is a very good example. Between 1990 and 2014, our emissions fell by 23%, while our economy grew by 46%. And there are many other good examples around the world. To have a high level of ambition, every and each country has to make efforts to meet our global common long-term goal. If we limited the responsibility of this major task to a number of developed countries, the deal here in Paris will be meaningless. Take these facts as an example. Developed countries account for under 35% of global emissions, and they are falling. The European Union is responsible for just 9%. Those responsible for the remaining 65% of the global emissions must also take urgent action. Without them, the deal in Paris will be meaningless. Since 2011, China has emitted more than the European Union and the United States put together. And in the last 2 years, China's CO2 emissions per capita reached 7.6 tons, higher than the 6.7 tons in the European Union. This proves once more that a collective long-term goal, a common ambition review mechanism, and a single set of transparency and accountability rules, as advocated by the European Union, are must-haves in the Paris Agreement. The European Union is building alliances to ensure that the Paris Agreement is robust enough and credible enough to put us on track to our below 2 degrees objective. As leaders, we have a huge responsibility on our shoulders. We have to be ambitious because a minimalistic agreement will not cut it. The European Union will only settle for an ambitious, robust, and credible deal. It's time to get to work together.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Commissioner. Let's move to questions and answers. Sarah, please.
Thank you. Sarah Stefanini with Politico. I was just wondering about the division within the EU, the division of labor. I've heard that you've assigned certain ministers to work on certain issues, and also if you're working on bilateral relationships by assigning, using traditional relationships between certain countries and other countries.
Yes. Okay. Yes, so in order to have a very transparent but also participation of our ministers who are here and to use the power we have as Europeans to have 28 ministers here and the Commissioner. So that's important to have everyone helping us having this ambitious deal, and for this reason, ministers who are here this week are actively taking part in different working groups. So different countries have different working groups where they can take part and can help us take the floor so that EU is represented in those sessions.
Thank you.
You have asked the way we are following. For sure, we are following the working method the French presidency has established, and we have assigned ministers, but the presidency and the Commission, we keep on doing bilaterals. So yesterday we have bilaterals with China, United States, we have with the G77, the Cartagena Group, EOSIS. Today we will work with Turkey, Nicaragua, we will meet China. So we keep on with all bilateral systems, but we are leading also on a sectorial basis in the way the French presidency has established. And we go for one group, and other ministers go to another, and we coordinate at European Union level. Every morning we report back, and we seek support on orientations and guidelines for negotiation from the 28 ministers.
So in engaging all the ministers, we are sure that Europeans are represented on a political level, which shows the engagement of the EU.
Thank you. Yes, you please.
My name is Tang Zhiqiang from China Xinhua News Agency. Mr. Commissioner, NGOs said this morning that EU is one of the strongest blocker of negotiation on finance issue because EU insists that developing countries also have to take obligation of finance in post-2020 if EU will accept the 100 billion US dollar as a floor. Is it the case, and will EU accept 100 billion as a floor? What's your condition? Thank you.
In finance, we are still negotiating, and the details of negotiation will be revealed at the end of the day. But we are committed, the European Union, to increase our level of support. We have been the biggest support of climate finance since 2009-2014, we have delivered more than 56% of global climate finance. Last year, the European Union and member states, we delivered 14.7 billion euros of climate finance. And we are committed to increase climate finance in the future. But we are saying, we are passing the message, is that the needs in the future to implement INDCs and many conditional INDCs will be big. And it's not enough that developed countries at the moment continue with the support. We will continue supporting as we come, and we will increase over time our support. And we will, and in the process of stock taking, finance will also be part of the process. It's not only we mitigation, commitment, adaptation. We finance, we will put on the table what we are doing. But we are saying is that the world has changed a lot since the convention established Annex 1 and classify the world in two categories. Economic development has been quite different in the world. There are many developing countries of the past that have, at the moment, have levels of growth and levels of financial capacity that they didn't have in 1992. And this is an agreement who will start on 2021, but for the whole century. Countries will have an evolution in the countries who were rich will become poor. And countries who were poor will become the richest countries of the world because they are developing, which is the good thing, and they will become emerging economies first and very highly developed countries out there. So we say every country in the position to do so should support the poorest, least developed countries of the world. This is, we will do our task. We will not backslide on our levels of support. We will increase our level of support, developed countries. But other people will come along. And China is doing now a very good South-South cooperation. So it shows that this is possible. The other day, even Vietnam committed to the Green Climate Fund, $1 million. But that was a sign of solidarity. What we are saying is the needs are huge. According to the International Energy Agency, the full implementation of the climate pledge will require the energy sector to invest $13.5 trillion in energy efficiency dollars and low carbon technologies from 2015 to 2030. 8.3 trillion to improve energy efficiency and 4 trillion for renewables in the power sector. These are the amounts needed. For sure, the biggest part will be in the private sector. And for that, enabling friendly environments for investment in the regulatory system of the different countries will be very important. But also public support will be important, mainly for adaptation, because the private sector focuses more on mitigation. For adaptation, we'll need to have public funding. And that's why we say, in the future, let's enlarge the donor base. In the future, we, developed countries, we will be there. We will not backslide. But other people who have the capacity, which are in the position to do so, should also come along. We are negotiating language with some people to try to find a compromise in this area. But it will be very positive for the least developed country, for the poorest countries of the world, that we enlarge the donor base and that we support the development of their INDCs and the change of the energy mix and the forestry policies.
Yes, please. There in the first row.
Thank you. Kevin Grandian, National Observer. In previous sessions, the EU has been sending strong signals on the language around shifting the trillions into low carbon and climate resilient development, and I think you mentioned it earlier in your answer. My understanding is that this paragraph in the text is being aggressively challenged by a few people or a few negotiators, mainly the Saudi Arabians, and I'm wondering if the EU is going to maintain their defense of this or become more vocal on this particular line and ensuring that it stays in the text.
We are very keen on having very clear long-term goals. The long-term goal, for sure, is if you want to be in the 2 degrees, below the 2 degrees, we have to go for climate neutrality at the end of the century, and we have to reduce CO2 emissions to 0. That's for sure. No? But we don't only want to have a long-term goal for the end of the century. We also want 2050 goals according to what science says. And the IPCC panel said that in order to be in a pathway, to be in a trajectory to go to the 2 degrees, we have to reduce our emissions between 40 and 70% compared with 2010 levels. The target the European Union is defending is 50% reduction compared to 1990 levels, which is equivalent to 60% compared with 2010. So we have a position which is in the upper range that the IPCC suggests. We think the decisions in this COP should be based on science. And we don't understand why, when we are proposing a mid-century goal based on science, there is some reluctance on some parties. If we all agree we have to go to the 2 degrees, we have to have pathways, strategies, ways to achieve from today, where we are around 3 degrees, we are. To go to 2 degrees, we have to have trajectories in 2050. And we produce an objective figure that is facing lots of difficulties. A quantitative objective in 2050, many people are very reluctant because some of them don't understand this is a global target. It doesn't mean every single country will have to reduce emissions by 50% compared to 1990 level. Globally, all of us. Because we, European Union, will say we will go much farther. The trajectory we established for ourselves is between 80 and 95% reduction of emissions in 2050. So we understand we are capable to do bigger efforts, but globally we should be on the trajectories that the IPCC panel has established.
Yes, yes, you go ahead. Is the mic coming your way? Yes.
Thank you. We know that Chinese President Xi, in the opening ceremony, recommended to build a win-win, equitable, and balanced governance mechanism on climate change. What's your view on it?
All Chinese president and all the messages of the leaders were very positive. They design ambitious things. The problem is when we go to negotiators, some things are not translated with the same degree of enthusiasm. And then when you have to go to the details, things become difficult. So I think we have to be consistent with those positive messages of the leaders. The leaders have acknowledged the challenge of climate change. And when we get to the details, things are much more complex. We are very ambitious because we think an ambitious climate change is good mainly for the least developed countries, mainly for the poorest countries. And I will tell you an example. We established ourselves in the European Union a target for 2020 of 20% reduction of emissions and 20% in renewables. It was a major challenge because at the time, the technologies in renewables were not so highly developed. We developed the technologies. We paid the price of the learning curve, but now the technologies are available and very cheap. Solar panels have a reduction of price of 80% in the last few years, and they are cheaper. So we understand that when we establish ambitious targets, we develop technology, we develop innovation, we make energy cheaper, and we facilitate developing countries to produce their energy they need at lower prices than we have produced in the past and with less pollution and with less emissions. So I think it's a win-win solution, but sometimes it's difficult to explain that having an ambitious agreement is very positive for everybody, for the countries more developed of the world and for the least developed countries. It's a win-win situation for everybody. First, we solve the major challenge of the planet. If global warming becomes real, and it's already real in many parts of the world, it will change our ecosystem, our biodiversity. The damage will be enormous. Hurricanes, floods, droughts, that's for sure. And nobody questions what science says. If we don't question what science says, why don't you follow the pathway that science says we should follow?
Thank you. Let's take the final question. You there, please. Behind you go.
Thank you. Carl Ritter from the AP. wonder if the Commissioner could update us on the latest negotiations when it comes to the bindingness of the emissions targets. There's obviously some different viewpoints on that, with the United States having some trouble with binding targets in the treaty. Thank you.
In the groups that the French presidency has established as such, there is not a group on legal form, no? So we are dealing with the bindingness of the different things in all the different groups. So it's not one special focus at the moment in legal form. What is happening at the moment is that with the European Union, that we are for binding mitigation commitments, we also have a very clear concern that we don't want to repeat the experience of Kyoto, in which some countries were unable to ratify the treaty and were not part of the treaty. Kyoto was a very limited exercise in climate change ambition. 38 countries, less than 30% of global emission covers, meaningless in impact in climate change. It was a first exercise. We support international legally binding agreement, for sure. And many countries, and also the United States also supports a binding agreement, because the United States is not supposed to all that the agreement is not binding. There are many elements in the final Paris Protocol or Paris Agreement that will be binding: long-term goals, dynamic process, accounting rules, and lots of elements will be binding, lots of other elements. The problem is whether mitigation commitments will be binding or not. And that's one of the things that is going to be decided. We, from the very beginning of the process, we said that we're ready to discuss alternative approaches if they would ensure that the Paris Agreement can provide a robust legal framework and maximum certainty in parties delivering on their targets. And that should include provisions for tracking and promoting parties' progress on the mitigation commitment. So at the moment, we are exploring possibilities, language of how we can fund landing zones. We have been, in the first week of the negotiation, most of the past, the European Union was trying to bridge proposals, have been on their comfort zones. We tried to land bridging proposals, not in this specific issue in the first week. But in this week, we have to find landing zones for everything. We need an inclusive agreement, an universal agreement. We need the United States on board, and we have to find a solution. For sure, an ambitious solution, not a meaningless solution. Our position remains, we want binding mitigation commitments, but at the same time, we want the United States on board. We understand the concerns they have because of the political situation in the Congress and the Senate, and the position of the Republican Party in these issues. We understand that. But we want an agreement which is fit for purpose. And we cannot forget that the United States is responsible for 11.85% of world global emissions. You cannot make an important agreement in climate change if the second big emitter of the world is not on board. So we will have to find a solution. We are not already there, but during this week we will have to have some kind of landing zone, provided the agreement is robust, there are robust transparency and accounting rules, provided the long-term goals are there, provided the dynamic process is there, and provided there are some elements to build trust in the rest of the party that mitigation commitments will be implemented in the different countries.
Many thanks, Minister and Commissioner. I think we've used our 30 minutes. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending. Have a nice afternoon. Thank you.
Fathers, brothers, sisters, children, grandchildren, some of us.
For decades to come. So it's the time to get down.
Will do this. A few words now on the process. Planet. We need to act urgently and to put the world on a path.
Base our political decisions on science. Secondly, the 5-year review mechanism and strengthen ambition over time, because this will enable us to keep up with the latest. These three elements are reasonable asks, and many other parties of the European Union. However, I have heard a few countries, and you know who they are, why we think this negotiation position is not right.
Yes.
My name is Tang Zhijiang.
Financial capacity that they didn't have in 1992. And this is an agreement of global climate finance. Last year, the European Union and